So we need to stop reporting marketing and start leading growth. And I say this with, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of the detail that we feel the need to share with some of the senior leaders is just not relevant. It's minutiae, and it's confusing. And I think part of the main problem is that we keep getting asked the same question, and that is, okay, we spent 12 mil, so what did we actually do? What does marketing do? And we need to be able to sort of justify that. So in my view, there's two key jobs that marketing data has to do. And one is to direct and steer and optimize for better performance, and that is a marketing job, and that's the minutiae. And the second is to understand the cumulative effect of the total marketing strategy delivered against the commercial objectives within the cost envelope. And that's the conversation we should be having with the broader business. And that is the narrative that should be interesting to the business as well. Can you imagine going into, the CFO's office and saying, take me through every detail of that pension investment. Take me through every detail of that capital investment. We're marketeers. It's not our job to be interested in that stuff. So it's really about being really clear what is relevant across the whole business and how we manage that narrative. So the problem isn't one side is right and one side is wrong. It's really about we're speaking different languages. And marketeers, we're talking in clicks and reach and engagement and MQLs. But the rest of the leadership team, the CEOs, the CFOs specifically, they don't want to hear anything unless it's got a pound sign in, right? They just want to know we are making money and we're not spending. So we've become brilliant over the last 20 years of measuring activity, and we have multiple ways of measuring attribution. We have all this beautiful digital data, but I think what we haven't necessarily become as good at is translating that in a language that is relevant to the broader business. So can you imagine you've just spent 20 minutes walking through your numbers, the engagement levels, brand awareness is up, and then someone at the end of the table pipes up and says, and? So what? There's nothing more flattening than that, right? And the instinct is think it's a battle, and it's a battle against finance and creativity. And it's not. It's just we need to speak the same language. And the term I often use with my team on a day-to-day basis is really simple. It's, okay, we're doing X activity. There's an equal sign, and what comes after that? There should always be an equal sign, and there should always be a dollar sign, a pound sign, whatever currency we're operating in. So it's not a measurement problem, it's a translation problem. I genuinely believe in most organizations we have all the data that we need, we have all of the performance material. It's just how do we translate that and extract it into a language that is relevant for the broader leadership team. So the second thing I want to talk about is alignment and language. And interestingly, I did a very similar talk to this a few months back. And what I found was, very surprisingly, was that I would say at least 50% of the CMOs and senior leaders in the room that I was talking to had never seen their P&L. And I found that really interesting because if you haven't seen the P&L, you don't know how the P&L was built, you don't know the assumptions that were put into the P&L, how do you know how to build a marketing plan that can deliver against that? So if nothing else, you should at least see the assumptions that were made to get to that number. And I'm hoping that's not true for this room. I hope you all are privy to that kind of information. So what does growth mean to the business? And this is the thing, it's probably different to every single business, depending on what stage they are in growth. To a scale up, it's all about top-line growth. So it's always about growth until they get to that point where they need to prove profitability. For a big corporate, it's probably all of those things, and it probably swings. One week it's revenue, the next it's market share, and I remember in No 2 Days, it was very much like that. It was, flipping and flopping every week, but we understood fundamentally what the core strategy was for that year, and we understood where we needed to focus, despite the trading numbers flipping and flopping. So we need to get this clarity and we need to get this consistency. So if the CEO is saying it's all about the revenue, but the board is saying it's actually all about valuation, then we don't have an aligned strategy. And if we don't have an aligned strategy, we can't deliver aligned metrics. So let's define, I've picked revenue here, but the definitions really need to be defined across the total leadership team. So is revenue about quality or quantity? And again, it may be that it's a mix of those both, but what is the mix? Is the mix 40%, 60%? Do you know what you're chasing? Do you know what you're going after? And not all revenue is equal. So as I said, in a scale-up phase, any revenue is good revenue because you're trying to prove market fit. And once you've proved market fit and you've proved that top-line growth is there, then the board are going to start saying to you, okay, well, now I need you to prove to me it's profitable. And therefore, you're going to have to be a bit more selective as to what kind of customers you acquire, because if it's an expensive customer acquisition cost, you don't want to be going after quantity. You're going to have to really go after quality and go for those customers who are going to come back and buy from you again, and not churn. But it's really important to share and define those metrics and be really clear on what underpins all of that growth. What is the LTV that you need? What is the LTV that you have? And how do you focus with your CRM to grow that lifetime value of a customer? So then how do we refine? So I don't know, 100K in revenue sounds like a great win, right? But what if some of those customers never come back? What if they were on a discounted price? What if they were here to come, gone tomorrow? What if they weren't profitable? But then you could spend 500K on a campaign and get really good quality customers who do come back. They tell their friends. They are true advocates. But it's a different type of revenue. So we need to focus on a few additional questions to, what is revenue, quality or quantity? What margin did it generate? Did those customers stay or did they go? And what was their ultimate lifetime value? And how much did it cost us to acquire them? So there's 4 numbers that I believe marketing should own, and this will be very much disputed across many businesses, and it often even gets disputed across product. I've worked in environments where product felt they owned these numbers. But ultimately, if you're responsible for delivering the numbers in the P&L and you're spending the biggest part of the budget to drive the customer acquisition, to retain the customers, to get more money out of them, these 4, I think, are key and fundamental. So firstly, revenue, which we've talked about. Not how much, but what kind. Profitable, repeatable, full price, and what's the mix? And there'll be times of the year when maybe the market is heavy and you've got lots of opportunity, so you'll go straight after volume. And there might be other times of the year when you need to focus back onto your quality customers. Second one is margin, and really understanding what that margin is, because top-line growth at a really high acquisition cost is not good growth. The third one is retention, and how much it costs when you lose a customer, and how much retention adds value. And to do that, you need to understand your lifetime value. So it's the one number that really forces this, and if our customer acquisition cost is rising, but our lifetime value is not, then we've got a real roadblock. And CFOs don't hate marketing, they just hate uncertainty. And they like to have a lot of certainty wrapped around everything we do. But I think it's really easy to get into those battles, especially when you're focusing in trying to communicate the minutiae, because we have so much minutiae, because we have so much data, and it can become exhausting and very circular. And I speak from experience here, so we're all in the same boat here. So they need a couple of reframes. So firstly, we'll talk about brand. It's not a soft spend. It's a future cash flow. It's adding value to the business. And the conversations need to be steered around treating brand spend in the same way that you would treat investing in pensions or capital investment, and not expecting the return tomorrow or by Friday's results or by next week's sales figures. That kind of investment you're not going to see in short-term return. And then attribution is not really the problem. I think, yes, attribution models can be complex, and they're very complex to explain, and sometimes they're not always without holes and without fault. But I'm not sure, even if you could get to a 0.000% decimal place of accuracy around an attribution, whether this problem would be removed. I think it would still exist. I think the main problem is the lack of alignment around what growth looks like and what the business is really trying to achieve. And it needs to be consistent. And I'm sure you'll all have experienced this. You start the year consistent, you start the year aligned, and then almost 3 months in, things seem to be changing. Everyone's pivoting, the strategy's changing. We've got a few new KPIs that have just been plucked out of somewhere, and no one understands where they are. But that's the point. You need to get back and realign on those numbers and be clear that the strategy is built to deliver the original numbers, not the new ones. And then when you think about how we talk like an investor and how we talk about payback period and portfolio return and risk and confidence. So if you think about, if we walk in a room and say to someone, ROAS was 4.2 in line with target, it's a bit meaningless in isolation, isn't it? It doesn't really mean anything to anyone. But if we say we're 80% confident that this is going to deliver 400,000 in incremental margin with an upside of X, now we've got the ears of the right folk in the room. So it really is about a reframe. And thinking about like a portfolio, we can then talk about things like your long-term investments, your medium-term investments, and your short-term investments. So that brings me on to the long versus short, which is obviously the age-old debate about whether we brand as a long or a short-term investment. As marketeers, I think we all know the answer to that. But I'm going to focus in how we communicate this rather than the argument itself. So I think about it a little bit in the world of farming. I live in the country, so why not? I see a lot of tractors and do a lot of hay baling. So let's think about it in the world of farming. So performance marketing is just harvesting what's already there. You're just acquiring customers from a market who've already hand-raised, they've already Google searched, they're already in the market, they're already alert, they're already ready to pay that, to press that button. And it converts existing demand, and it's measurable immediately because of all this clickable data. But brand building is like planting, and it's planting the demand. It's planting the demand in advance. Now, you can harvest a field for a very long time, right until there's nothing left to harvest, right? You've got to keep replanting. And so this happens all the time, and we see it all the time, and we see brands pull back on brand spend because it feels expensive, and it feels like they can't see that return. But I think we've probably all seen that beautiful graph that all of our media agencies show us, that when you go for a short-term performance, you just see a lovely little up and down. So as soon as you take the money out, your sales will drop. As soon as you put the money back in, it will go back up. Brand building, however, gives you a beautiful upward curve like this, and it's consistent, and it grows in an upward trajectory. And I've likened it sometimes, especially with PPC, is you're kind of asking Google to do your marketing for you, and you get a sack of cash, and you trot over to Google's offices, and you say, I'm going to give you some cash. How many customers would you like to give me this month? And they decide. So having a mix of both of those things where you can capture that 5% of the audience who are in market right now today, but you can groom and nurture the 95% of the market who are not in market today is where you're going to see that consistency of the curve. And so I touched on this a little earlier about investment portfolio. So again, how we communicate this, again, it should be like a layered cake. These are your short-term investments. This is what I can tell you the results in the next quarter, and this is where we should expect to see that return. This is the medium term, where you're building consideration and you're building trust and you're building confidence in those customers that you've made aware that you exist. And then there's your long term, which is a much more long-term investment. It's like pensions, it's like capital investment, and we should all think about that as marketeers and as a leadership function.